Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the last episode of 2025 of Reality Check Podcast. I'm Carlos, and I am joined by, it's going to be 26 degrees tonight, Marcus and Raul Mas. So this is our last one for the year. I hope you all had a terrific Christmas and Hanukkah, and I hope that tomorrow you bring in the new year with zeal, with joy, and with good health on the horizon. Tonight's topic is it's not just Somali fraud, and it really isn't. I'm going to say embarrassing this exposure by Nick Shirley. It almost reminds me on a different scale of when Kyle Rittenhouse, 17-year-old kid, grabbed an AR-15 and he took typical police response units to school on how to handle a mob. Amazing, but I know that's maybe a reach. That's a reach, but this kid Nick has pissed off a lot of people. We'll get into more and more of that later. But obviously there's a lot of cover, and yes, as the title suggests, clearly it is more than the Somali situation in Little Mogadishu, also known as I'm calling it Minneapolis stand now, is what I'm calling the city, and the pandering is disgusting. But anyway, and there are, as a little earlier was mentioned, and will be treated tonight. Marcus brought up the fact that this is a nasty octopus. There are always many tentacles, and it has a lot of ramifications. We see that a lot of people on the left, and we'll get into that as well soon, are making excuses. I call it the yeah buts. Yeah, but LA. Yeah, but Chicago. Yeah, but Miami. Yeah, there's a lot of yeah buts. And there's a stark difference between, and we're going to talk about some of those yeah buts. I want to talk about Miami specifically, and I know Raul has an equal knowledge of this, as do I. But later, I want to introduce a stark difference between all the yeah buts and Minneapolis. So, Marcus, why don't you go into the tentacles a little bit? Let's have some seafood.
Yeah. Well, I look at it more like as the perfect storm. You get the second most corrupt country, Somalia, people coming into a state of Minnesota where there's no checks and balances. So what we have is, or what we're witnessing is like the perfect storm, and it made uh, Minnesota, in terms of handing out uh, welfare, second compared to Massachusetts, which is like $48,000 per person. But but I'm going to quote like from Scarface: "Don't underestimate the other person's greed."
Mhm.
And what we see, if we're only going back a few years, how much the fraud expense ballooned. So from like Meals for Kids, from 2019 to 2020, it went from 70 million to 336 million within 3 years. The housing to deal with the poor, disabled, mentally handicapped, it went from in 2021 from 2.5 million to 300 million. Autism is now it costs like $1 billion in since 2018. Community support program from 4.6 million in 2021 to 180 million. Medicaid, Minnesota had a $22 billion surplus in 2022. Going to fiscal year 25, 26, it's going to be at a $3 billion deficit. So that's a, a trajectory that's unsustainable.
Even if you think that 9 billion supposed top of the figure, I don't think that's the ceiling. Yeah, I
It's
think
gonna
I
go
think
up.
it's just spinning it down.
Yeah. So like what the one of the results, the fallouts, is that people's property tax is going up. I was reading an article where this person, it's a 13% increase in property tax just to cover all the deficit. But this kind of goes into uh, the previous talk about like Obamacare, where you mentioned in the state of Florida, there's people in the red state want to keep their Obamacare, and I reiterate it's rife with fraud, and that was the rallying cry for the Republicans. It's like there's so much fraud built into it, whether it's SNAP or Medicaid, Medicare. But what we're witnessing in Minnesota is how corrosive, how deep it got. And when I mentioned about like uh, how it becomes like a big octopus, how the tentacles branch everywhere. I'll look at it like the Ford auto plant. You know, where if you want to dominate an automobile industry, you go look at the vertical and horizontal lines of production and distribution. Well, the Somalis kind of perfected that in terms of fraud. So when it comes to because of the kickback, so like with Obamacare, the reason why insurance rates are always going up is because HMOs are putting like a 20 to 30% kickback to increase the cost of medical services. Okay, but in terms of how fraud is being built into the system, uh, look at meals for kids. So the person who's funding this charity is supposedly feeding like thousands of kids, but in order to make it realistic, you know, they get the parents to sign off, you know, and the parents get a kickback.
They get it's envelopes being handed.
Yeah, and then the food, they produce fake receipts from people who make the food, and a lot of times it's kind of built in where it's family. It's a family run a food a place that makes food, and they just build it within the family.
Yeah.
And when you look into some of these the fraud that's going on, everything's kind of interconnected. You see like a grocery store with a restaurant and something else. But the thing is, it's like with SNAP benefits, uh, people would buy food in like a grocery store. They get a kickback, and that food would be put into to the restaurant or sold at a cheaper cost compared to a legal supermarket.
Yeah.
So it makes it hard to compete. So, you know,
Yeah,
I mean,
I saw that, man. That actually shocked me. It's that some guy was arrested because he had SNAP benefits card, hundreds of them, which, by the way, one very telling thing, there's no photo ID on these SNAP cards, right? It's just like a gift card. You get it from the government, right? It's basically currency that you're getting. It's just digital currency, right? It's a stored value card. But apparently, these rings, generate thousands of these SNAP benefit cards from the government. And then, because I guess, they can't literally go and use them themselves, they will turn around and discount them and sell them to, as Marcus was alluding to, some guy who's got a restaurant or something, and he's buying 60 cents on the dollar for food stamps, if you will, or the SNAP benefit cards, and then he's giving them to his employees who go out to buy restaurant supplies and food and whatnot using these SNAP benefits. And it's just an incredible racket, man. I mean, and I don't know where this thing is going to stop, man. I think Minnesota is obviously, I don't think it's an outlier. I think that Minnesota just has taken it to an extreme. Yeah. But what I'm hearing is, for example, I read the other day some article that in Ohio now, they've discovered their own sort of racket going on. Apparently, Ohio had passed some laws to allow people to get paid for taking care of their elderly parents and stuff, and that's now turned into like a huge racket, because how do you figure out whether in fact that's the services are being provided or not, to other family members? And all of these programs, especially going back to the COVID era, when 5 years ago, whatever, they were designed deliberately to be put out there in massive numbers, easy to access. Okay, people got used to them, and they realize that we can continue to get away with this indefinitely. Apparently, that's been the thought process, and I think it's just multiplied. And one of the key questions that I have, Carlos and Marcus, is, and I've always asked myself this question, why do we pay for this enormous army of regulators that we have in America, right? Regulating every part of our lives, right? Regulating banks, okay? And yet banks still fail. Savings and loans still fail, right? And they've got auditors going in there. My question is, does the federal government just create these programs, start handing out money, and where are the checks and balances? I mean, if a private company did this, they would go bankrupt, okay? But not the government, because the government can continue to just sort of print money. But where is I think what people are most frustrated about, what they keep asking about, is this whole subject of accountability, okay? And I think the Trump administration is running the risk, especially now with this crisis, okay? A year into the Trump administration, and people are still asking, okay, where's the accountability for January 6th? Where's the account for those trials and everything else? Where's the accountability for Epstein? Where's the accountability for, all this malicious behavior that we knew happened? And now all of a sudden, we're finding out that in Minnesota, okay, there's been this incredible, stealing of public funds. Where's the accountability? And I'll just say one last thing, man. I'm very fond of that American expression, pulling on a thread. It's not even American; it's a universal expression. You start pulling on a thread, loose thread on your clothes, on your shirt or something, and you don't know where that's going to end. Okay, and I have a feeling that Minnesota is the tip of the thread, if you will, the tip of the iceberg, and people are going to be pulling on Minnesota, and it's going to, spill over into Wisconsin. It's going to spill over to the Midwest and Ohio. And before you know it, America's going to wake up and find out that literally they have been, robbed blind for decades now. And not just, under Democratic administrations. This has been going on for a long period of time. That's my 5 cents.
Corruption doesn't have a limit, a time limit. Corruption is corruption. And as far as why do we create all those regulators? Because it's government jobs, and government loves to grow, which is why it's impossible for Republicans to win in Virginia. Next to impossible. I was always amazed how Glenn Youngkin pissed off enough parents and school board cases that he got elected. But they are right by Washington. Look at every state, every red state, almost every one of them. The capital of those red states is a blue city. Why? Because it's government. That's the problem. Like Reagan said, we're not the solution to the problem. We are the problem. And why they don't want to look, they want to look the other way. They don't want to look into it because there's a lot of NGOs. There's a lot of the tentacles and the different levels that Marcus shortly ago alluded to. And they have a vested interest. And how do you measure that? Easy. Look at all the doors they were slamming in Nick Shirley's face, and look at all the resistance. But now DHS is in there, border patrol's in there. They can't slam the door on them, and it is an issue. And I want to also, it's going to be in other cities. I'll talk about Miami when the next go around, but I wanted to say one glaring difference. Anytime a liberal tells you, yeah, but here's where the yeah, but stops. Latinos, blacks, whatever groups that are doing this in other cities, and that's let's say the quiet part out loud. That's almost always, not always, but the majority of the time, the groups that are behind all this in different cities, the scamming, the hood, el barrio, whatever. But here's one difference. Latinos in LA, East LA, blacks in Harlem, they're not trying to overthrow the government. They're not trying to impose Sharia law. You walk around Minneapolis years ago, this is not new. I saw those men on the street with a camera asking Somalis, what do you prefer, that the country be run by the Constitution or Sharia law? And every goddamn one of them said, oh, I prefer Sharia law. Okay, that's the attitude. They hate this country. They don't give a fuck about assimilating. And they're taking, I'm reminded, Marcus, you gave the gentle line from Scarface. Tony Montana also said, "America, this country is like a big pussy. It just has to be fucked by somebody."
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing. And yeah, I'm pissed. I am mad because all of us in this podcast pay taxes, and there are millions of Americans who pay taxes.
Yeah. So one thing is you don't underestimate the laziness of the political class. Their solution to anything is to throw money at it, and if there's a problem with it, throw more money at it, and it doesn't solve a problem. But what it does, it creates a crisis. So with California, we have a problem with homelessness. Throw enough money at it, then it becomes a homeless industrial complex.
Yeah.
And like whatever, 95% of the money is towards overhead or waste or fraud.
So,
And
during this interruption, I left out one other difference in the but none of the groups in the inner cities or the hoods or whatever that are doing the scamming and the fraud at nationwide, none of them are sending money to support Islamic terrorist organizations like Al Shabaab or
yeah,
ISIS. That's another glaring difference. That makes the Somali thing, and not just the tip, it's the worst part of the iceberg. I'm sorry, continue.
no, but because of this idea of throwing money at it, we have a charity industrial complex, we have an NGO industrial complex, we got an IGO industrial complex. But what was funny is that Raul brought up a question, which made me think of another question, and I was thinking like during COVID, there was a lot of government forced a lot of businesses shut down. The inflation was out of control. I was working overtime, and I was telling my girlfriend, I'm making good money as a government employee, but how could anybody afford it? Because I'm having a hard time keeping up with cost, and I can't imagine how people who were making less than me could afford it. Then when I talked to some businesses, they said we can't find people, we can't find people for them to work, and I'm like, how could people not work and not afford the cost of living right now? And then going about what you mentioned, Raul, was like, well, maybe the answer is the fraud. People are taking so much kickback that there's no incentive to work, which ties into in Minneapolis, there was an estimate that 30,000 Somali single women are on SNAP and welfare benefits, single, in the metro area, which is unheard of. Like statistically, it's not proportional to about people who are getting married, but they're not technically single. They're really married or have somebody into their lives, but they're defrauding the benefits just to say they're on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and getting back to the bureaucracy,
Look at nothing. Only essentials.
This whole entire sort of lack of oversight, right? I mean, if you think about it, so many of these programs are designed in such a way, like, what I was alluding to, that, the government gauges success by the number of people that are receiving benefits, right? I mean, if they roll out a new program and they don't have any takers for it, then obviously they haven't done their job properly because there was never a need to begin with. So it's, if they identify a need, it is in that bureaucrat's or that government official's best interest to make sure that that need is larger than what was expected.
And the need in Somalia and in Minneapolis is that they have the highest autism rate for kids in the state or in the country.
Well,
So more money has to be thrown into it.
No, supposedly, and when you were rattling off those numbers, Marcus, and you were talking about how this program, how the expenditures for autism has
over
gone from X
over
numbers to this,
300% increase.
and you're thinking to yourself, well, wait a second, man, has there been a 300 or 400% increase in autism in Minneapolis in such a short period of time? Has there been, such an incredible increase in poverty rates in such a short period of time? No. What those numbers are telling you is that the fraud, okay, has increased seven, eightfold, tenfold over that period of time. It has nothing to do with autism. It has nothing to do with child care centers. Those are just the fronts. You know, um, that one individual with a tiny little store shop that was the size of a closet type of stuff, and he was just collecting gazillions of benefits because supposedly he was running some sham service out of that telephone booth of a market that he had, right?
Well, now that we're
Or,
talking numbers, now that we're talking
or
numbers, 86% of the Somali population in Minneapolis is on welfare. Guess what the number of Black Americans, African Americans is? 25%. So they are triple the amount in welfare. That's a scam. They just don't, they pay them not to work. And the obvious reason, the answer is simple. It's buying votes. I mean, they buy votes from low income Americans to the Democrats have been doing it for decades. But these people, as both of you have alluded to recently, have mentioned, they've put it on steroids. I mean, they've jacked it up. They say we can take what you're doing and we can exponentially jack it up.
Yeah. Look, and I think one thing that's important also to acknowledge, man, it's I think government officials, in Minnesota, in Ohio, wherever in Boston, eventually in New York, I think that this is going to snowball. It is already snowballing, and I think that they have to treat it seriously because the people that are not getting those benefits, the retirees that are getting squeezed, like myself and you, Carlos, and we're depending on our savings and fixed income, whatever, right? And that are not involved in these scams are pissed, okay? And government, exists because we allow ourselves to be governed, right? When a large number of Americans start feeling that, wait a second, I'm being scammed, you know, I'm having to pay taxes, and large amounts of taxes where others aren't paying a dime. And in fact, they're simply, not only are they not paying a dime, they're actually just living off of the government, okay? And they pay no taxes whatsoever and suffer no ill benefits. Man, that's a recipe for more than just jawboning. Let's leave it at that. I mean, I think people get angry, okay, and the middle class in America and the working class are loath to sort of take to the streets, right? But man, I think we're in for a whole world of hurt unless people take this very seriously and start addressing it and fixing these problems. And like I said, right before I came on the program tonight, I was listening that apparently now HHS is cracking down and saying no more child care payments to the state of Minnesota. Period. Okay. Yeah. So imagine the few legitimate child care businesses that do exist in Minnesota. Now they're going to be caught up in this, right? And we're going to need a wholesale change of the way any sort of benefits are doled out in America. And those SNAP cards, damn right, man. You better have a photograph on them. You better have a digital fingerprint of some sort. Okay, we have all this modern technology at our fingertips, supposedly, and you mean to tell me that we can't have better controls as to who gets this money, how it's used, where it's used, in what form, shape, manner, and that it's tied to a specific individual, and that individual's identity is verified, every single day that he's using that card. I mean, that's what it's going to take, and it's warranted, man. It's warranted. There's just too much money, too much corruption. It's costing America too much money. We can't afford it. We've got a $35 trillion debt that we've got to deal with. And we can't afford to have all this spillage, of waste as we're trying to clean up our financial act.
Well, it's also political will, and politicians do the squeaky wheel thing. If they don't get if their switchboards in their office, their phone lines don't get inundated and get melted by a lot of pissed off people, they don't act. And by the way, to quote Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. I've last few nights I've seen mayors of different towns in the river parts of Minnesota. They're pissed because they're small towns with a small budget and they're getting screwed. They had some project to do this or that, a legitimate project very needed by their local community, and it keeps being put off and being put off. And now they know. Now they know why. It's being put off because they had other fish to fry. I'm still.
Yeah,
I've been talking you guys with this. I
imagine, imagine, Carlos, what you just alluded to, right? I mean, if HHS is now cutting off all child care benefits in the state of Minnesota, I'm sure that there are, more than a handful of legitimate child care centers. Now they're going to get swept up into this, right? The few people that were doing things the right way, they're going to be hurt, right? Not because of something that they did, but because of the scammers that are out there. And a lot of good, hardworking people are being hurt every day as a result of this. They're having to pay higher taxes, right? They're not, this money that supposedly went for childcare that could have been used, like you just alluded to, for much better purposes, right? I mean, these municipalities or these states that could have used the money for something more, urgent, right? Now, everybody else in that state's feeling like they got ripped off to support the Somalis in their state,
Yeah, those are the same people that are pissed off now. But you know what, Raul? They voted for Walls, and they probably vote for him again. They voted for Amy Klobuchar.
Or
Okay,
the Somalis did.
No, it's one of the Somalis. You just touched on what I wanted to touch on. 80 something, let's say 86,000 people in a state of 4.8 million cannot sway an election. They can sway Minneapolis. I got that. But they cannot sway a whole state. It's just mathematically not possible.
Yeah,
So
but Minneapolis has historically been, remember, Minneapolis was the one that gave us McGovern, right? I mean, back in the 70s, he was from Minneapolis.
I knew, but and Al Franken, who stole the election from Norm Coleman, because Norm Coleman was a pussy and he didn't contest it. But my point is, even if you say, I don't want to piss off, what if somebody says, fuck it, I'm going to piss off the Somalis. I'm going to crawl up their ass with a flashlight, okay, and barbed wire. And you piss them off. So what? They're 86,000 in a state with close to 5 million. That's very small. They alone cannot sway an election. So there's a lot more people. It's the same with the Muslim mayors in 10, 11 different towns and cities in Britain. There's not enough Muslims. They're like 12% of the population. They're not enough to sway elections.
But Carlos, I think you're making a big assumption here, and I think Marcus, absolutely called it correctly. This $9 billion is not just benefiting, 86,000 Somalis, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is an enormous amount of entities that are out there, some of which are probably controlled by, white liberal Democrats representing, different NGOs and senior executives, that are in cahoots with these folks that are getting kickbacks or a cut of the action. Okay. That is simply too much money, as you alluded to, right? It boggles the mind that there can possibly be that many people on welfare, in the Somali community. Something else is going on here. Something smells rotten in Minneapolis. Okay, something smells rotten in Denmark, and it's not just the Somalis. Okay,
Keith Ellison,
a lot of other corruption taking place.
Keith Ellison said if it wasn't for the Somalis, he wouldn't have been Attorney General. And they've changed their voting laws. You don't have to provide an ID. You could vouch up to like 8 other voters saying, "Hey, I know this person." They allow driver's licenses to undocumented people. So there's a potential for a lot of fraud in terms of voting. But I like the pulling the string analogy because the more you pull, the more things would pop out of the woodwork. And with Doge, when they wanted to get into like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, to audit the fraud and waste, the biggest opponents were the Democrats.
Mhm.
And now, and how is it relevant? Look at what's happening right now in Minnesota. All that fraud is is based on a welfare system. So my take is, what's a good viable solution? I wrote that an article on Substack. I think we should repurpose the IRS instead of auditing taxpayers. We audit uh, charity organizations, all the various industrial complexes, anybody who's recipient of welfare, and we motivate the IRS agents that the agency and the individual who uncovers fraud would get a 1% or 1% return to them. So imagine if you were the IRS agent, uncovered $1 billion. If you get 1%, that's $10 million.
Yeah.
Now that would motivate uh, any federal employee to do their job on moving under rocks to find all that fraud.
Right.
And I think that would work. Money's a good incentive.
Right.
Greed's a good incentive.
Right.
But do it in a positive way.
But Marcus, this is kind of like, again, it's reflective of this sort of how would I describe this thing? Naivete on the part of the federal government for quite some time, right? And I'll give you another example. Okay, you were mentioning NGOs, not for profits. Okay, it is incredibly easy to set up a not for profit organization here in the U.S. I mean, literally, you go, you go to the state, you say you want to set up a nonprofit, you pay a fee, you register your little nonprofit, okay? You then go to the IRS, you tell them you're a nonprofit, they give you a tax exempt number. And yes, you have to file reports on an annual basis. I've got a small little scholarship fund that I run here. Some guy left me in charge of a scholarship fund for ROTC cadets. And we don't really do any fundraising. We do have very few activities other than just dispersing some checks once a year. So we have no operational expenses whatsoever. And as a result of that, I mean, what I got to send in once a year is literally a little like a little note card saying, hey, yeah, we didn't have more than $50,000 in activity, and I sign it and I send it in and I'm done. Right? There's no accountability, and I'm happy for it because it is a real charitable thing that's taking place.
Yeah.
But imagine something that simple, being perverted by somebody who's not a Raul Mas or a Marcus or a Carlos or any one of our viewers who are actually honest, decent people. I mean, the system is not, it just doesn't have the right protections, hasn't had them for a long time, and there's no oversight, right? It's like, why does it take this young man having to go with his cell phone to visit, on his own child care facilities, in Minnesota, and come to the conclusion that this is all one scam because there's no children at the child care centers? I mean, I'm a big fan of citizens being journalists, right? And this whole new thing, this power that we have now with these cell phones, that we can go out there and we can tape people and hold them accountable. But you have to ask yourself, what in God's name, is happening here when the government is literally sending out millions and millions of dollars, okay? And who's following up on it? Who's following up on it and saying, hey, you know what? Who are my top 10 beneficiaries of child care monies in the state of Minnesota, the state of Ohio, Florida? I need to go in there and I need to audit their ass from top to bottom. And on top of that, I need to pick some random names that are out there, and maybe some of the smaller ones as well, and really go in there and kick the tires and say, okay, how many kids do you have here? Show me your accounting controls that you have.
We give $40 billion a week to the Taliban, and the thing about why wasn't anything done? There were plenty of whistleblowers, but the system doesn't really help the whistleblowers. And sometimes it takes a citizen journalist to be their voice to it.
So by the way, again, getting back to numbers, and I'm going to keep pounding on this numbers thing. I just did a little math while you guys were doing your takes. I found that the population, not just the Somalis, the entire city of Minneapolis, which is the biggest city in the state of Minnesota. I think that's a given. You know what percentage of the entire state population they comprise? 7.5%. 7.5%. That means 92.5% of the state of Minnesota does not reside in Minneapolis. So there's a lot of people. That's why I feel real sorry for the whole state getting screwed, because the whole state is putting people like Al Franken, Amy Klobuchar, Tim Walz, Jesse Ventura, and on and on and on in office, and they don't give a shit. Those are states that it's a middle finger. And to Raul, you were asking, why doesn't that get looked into? Why no oversight? They don't care, because the average person that's involved in that, once you get elected, they run on, oh, we're going to clean this up, and we're going to oversight that, and we're going to make those people accountable. Once they get there, they say, hey, chill. In Spanish, they say, tranquilo, take it easy. Okay. Don't upset the apple cart. You're going to benefit. It's the same reason why people in government are not outraged when an illegal alien kills somebody. If it was their niece or their wife that got brutally raped, had their throat slashed, or got beaten to an unrecognizable pulp, they'd be really pissed off. But since the odds of that are very rare, extremely low, it's something that even if that does happen, they'll do me up, as Archie Bunker used to say, because they don't want to criticize the system. And the other thing, of course, is people don't want to be called racist, even though that's the race thing to me is just getting old. Tim Wall standing up there saying white supremacy,
Yeah, it's bullshit, man. That's total bullshit. It has been. It's been bullshit the whole time, right? I mean, you remember what's the guy, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? Oh, the biggest problem we have is white supremacy in the military. Fucking break, man. I mean, that was so wrong. He was just basically, kissing the ass of his new Democratic, masters after, Biden stole that election.
Right.
That's exactly what he was doing. Milley, General Milley was kissing,
yes,
the ring of the Biden administration, kissing the ring of, Chuck Schumer, kissing the ring of Nancy Pelosi, kissing their ass as well, because they were now in power, and he had to, show that even though he was an old white guy that looked like Fred Flintstone, he really was, a sensitive white guy, and that he acknowledged that supremacy was something that, was worth looking into, because he wanted to understand it according to his own words, right? It's fucking bullshit. And he knew it at the time that he was pandering, and he got away with it. And you know what? History, I think, will not record him well, and that whole time period. And I'm delighted to see that Trump has that photo of an auto pen in place of Joe Biden there in his Hall of Shame or Hall of Fame or whatever the hell he wants to call it, right? Because it was just a reckless administration. We're still paying for a disastrous 4 years of rule by Democrats.
And they know
disastrous 4 years.
That was by design. All of this is the Cloward pivot strategy. Just dump a dump truck full of shit, and the guy's got a teaspoon to clean it up with. That's what Trump is facing. And by the way, Mitch Levine is a dude who thinks it's a girl. Right. So that was even more embarrassing.
And by the way, who's the representative there from Milwaukee? Ilhan Omar, who apparently now, her net worth has shot up to $30 million in the space of like a year or two, right? It's like, wow, unbelievable, right? They get paid $174,000 a year, and yet, she's suddenly worth $30 million. You better peel back that onion, because I have a feeling, her shit's going to smell, a lot more than most people,
Yeah, well, she'll get elected again. They have to destroy her legally and throw her in prison or get her expelled from the Congress. I mean, don't just elect someone else in that community. Those people are completely fucked. But as far as today, I heard something about Wallace. Oh, these people are saying, Governor Wallace, you need to resign. Governor Wallace, and a couple of cynics on the panels in Fox said, you notice that the Republicans are just saying, Governor, you need to resign. I haven't heard one of them say we need a recall. Could it be that they're afraid to get reelected? I think Minnesota and California are so thoroughly fucked up that just for spite, just to give a middle finger, they'd reelect them. That's how fucking stupid those people are. And that is dangerous.
No, I don't know, man. I think I haven't spent much time in. I think I was in Milwaukee once. Probably like 40 years ago. It was colder. It was summer, and it was cold in the summertime.
That's
Um,
Wisconsin.
huh?
Wisconsin. You said Milwaukee.
I said, well, the whole Wisconsin, Minnesota, whatever, right next to each other, right? I mean, so
Yes, I get it.
I mean, I never been up there. Is my point. Okay, I've never really spent any time in Minnesota. I hear they're nice people, but they're historically a voted Democrat. They're the party of McGovern. That tells you all you need to know. They were the only
Yeah.
state that voted for McGovern in that election. So if they're that screwed up. I mean, that screw up is going back half a century now, right?
Isn't that
So,
Mondale and Wellstone too? Aren't they Minnesotans, if I'm not mistaken?
what's that?
Paul Wellstone, or Senator Welfare, as they used to call him.
Right.
What about Mondale? By the way, there's a reason. There's a reason, and it's ethnicity and it's history of immigration. Who were the original settlers of Minnesota? By and large, they were Scandinavian. So
Yeah.
they have that socialist, yes, sure mentality. Let's be generous. And they're and those countries, they're good people. And like you said, you show up on their doorstep, freezing, they'll bring you in, they'll give you some soup, they'll throw some wool socks on you, and they'll care for you. But that gets abused. Kindness gets abused. And that I heard some explanations of what is the origin of that generosity that is easily exploited by malicious people. And that's part of it. It's the Scandinavian upbringing and work ethic and kindness and generosity ethics of those people. My wife and I visited Michigan, but not the Detroit cesspool side. We visited Western Michigan, all along Lake Michigan and up to the tip where Canada is. And it's beautiful. And the Upper Peninsula. But you know what? Completely different people. Very different people. Not Gretchen Whitmer.
No, listen, I think, again, you don't want to paint the whole state with a broad brush. And, I know Wisconsin is a little bit better than Minnesota. But, and they've got the Green Bay Packers. So that's a huge, plus in their favor. But, they have, large rural communities
Yes.
that are by and large, fairly conservative, normal people.
So do Michigan.
Again, if we're talking about this, Carlos and Marcus, and the truth of the matter is that we talk about all of these problems in America, okay? And if you take a step back and you look at where all these problems are, where is the corruption? Where is the crime? Where is the abuse of power? All right, in America. And what you find is it's all concentrated in a handful of major urban areas, right? If you were to, for example, our America's, our incredible homicide rate, right? Okay. If you, discard the homicide rates of Chicago, of, Louisiana, Memphis, I mean, certain, by and large, Democratic run cities, urban cities, New York, et cetera. If you take out those crime rates, our homicide rates in America are actually, the same or lower than Europe, probably, right? But it's those urban cities in America where all of the problems, are festering. And by and large, Chicago's the perfect example, right? 500 plus murders a year, homicides. 90% of them are gang related. 80% of them are black on black, if not higher. Okay.
Mhm.
And the last time Chicago had a Republican mayor, I think, was back in the 1930s or something. It was literally a century ago. Okay.
Yeah.
That was the last time they had a Republican. And
Yeah.
that's why, the Chicago way, and Democrats, brag about the Chicago. Obama used to brag about the Chicago way. Elections have consequences and shit. Yeah. And they're used to that sort of, one party rule. And they look the other way, for in order to maintain Democratic control of Chicago. 500 homicides of young black males in Chicago is the price they're willing to pay to, just kind of look the other way, sweep it under the rug. Don't talk about that because we need to remain in control here in Chicago.
Yes, Marcus.
I think Trump is handling it right. Is to pretty much cut funding, because to keep the Democratic apparatus going, it needs to suck on the government tit. And if you dry it up, then they have to be more accountable, or the populace would blame them for the fault. So the narrative is shifting, especially in Minnesota. It's like they're not looking at Republicans as to blame, even if the funding is cut. They're looking at the Somalis and Governor Walz's administration for not doing a proper job. So I think that could be replicated everywhere else, because there's a lot of fraud in California, a lot of fraud in Massachusetts, New
Yeah.
York, Illinois, and
Look,
if and the thing is, the more we fund them, the more entrenched they become. You have to clear out the rot by, it's like a drug addict. You gotta cut them cold turkey and prove otherwise.
well, you're seeing it now also, what you just alluded to, California, right? I mean, how quickly we have forgotten the disastrous, response to the Palisades fires, that burned that city to the ground, right? Newsom is once again being talked about as the darling of the Democrats in the future presidential election. I mean, are these people over there friggin' stupid or what, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and they have a supermajority controlling the legislature in California. It is basically one party rule in California, even though there's still a fair number of Republicans living there. Okay. They've been gerrymandered out of the system, and it is a monopolistic one party state run by the Democrats.
And it takes them a month to count the votes too.
Right. But you know something, I am cautiously, and I underscore the word cautiously, optimistic that this is going to come to an end, because I think when you're starting to see, and you keep pulling on that thread, and you're beginning to, it started with Doge, now with this, the Palisades fire, the disastrous response in California. Now, Tim Walz being exposed as a fraud, and the whole state of Minnesota and the Somalis, stealing billions and whatnot. As more of this news percolates, I think you're going to see two things. Number one, the frustration of the working class getting higher and higher, and wanting more and more accountability, and not willing to sort of sit back and take it anymore, as that old movie line says. So I think you're going to see that, and I think you're also seeing a very important shift. You're seeing, for example, where does California get all its money from? Primarily from Silicon Valley, right? From San Francisco, all the billions and billions of dollars of wealth that have come out there. But guess what? There's a new sheriff in town, and his name is not Obama. It's not, Biden. It's Trump. And Trump is picking and winning losers in the world of artificial intelligence and data centers, and all those billionaires, including, Mark Zuckerberg, who I friggin' despise, are now having to go to Washington, D.C. and kiss the ring of Trump and donate to the Trump party. And they're going to, I think that, a lot of it is I'm sure a lot of it is just, transactional, but I got to believe that a lot of these people are not idiots either. And they're finally waking up to the fact that, you know what, this whole thing, this whole DEI hire shit, this whole, um, welfare state stuff, this social, benefit stuff, it's all friggin' bullshit, right? And we created this fake economy surrounding green energy and DEI and a million and one things that has nothing to do with productivity, with work, with thrift, with traditional American values that really built this country, right? And I think you're starting to see a sea change, and I hope it's permanent, man. I hope it's I hope that 3 years from now, when we have an election again, a presidential election, we have yet another Republican candidate, because Americans have woken up to the fact that the Democrats are rotten to the core and don't deserve to hold elected office so long as they continue to push upon us these fucking crazy ideas and policies and programs that are bankrupting America.
Don't forget too that those blue states are losing those companies, the big businesses, the tech companies, the manufacturers of expensive goods, hard goods. They're leaving those states, but those states are going to become bluer. They're going to become bluer because the residents that are voting with their feet are people educated and affluent enough to get the fuck out. Who stays behind? The diehard Marxists and the losers. That's who stays behind. Yes, Marcus.
I think Raul nailed it on the head. Is that people want accountability. People want they want people to be arrested. You got 3 judges in Minnesota who found some of these Somalis innocent. You get Ileana Ilmar going from a negative account from student loans to be worth over 30 million within 4 years. I try my hard to be a millionaire. I don't see it, and I don't know how you could jumpstart from negative to 30 million in a few years' time. So I think the issue is, people want accountability. If there's accountability, you get the voters to really back the Republican Party and Trump. And just to kind of tie back about accountability, going back to the fraud, like Medicare, like Minnesota, they have it where you could pay for transportation for a Medicare service, like you have to go to the hospital or whatnot. So what you have is a record amount of Somali who are taxi drivers, rideshare Uber drivers. There's like 10 to 12,000. So there's a story where somebody was driven to Boston and back. It was like a $2,400 charge one way, Uber, and there's no like fraud alert, no flagging. So that's why I mentioned about we should have like IRS agents to be the gatekeepers, to be the auditors, to question the funding, and going about money being fungible. It's really hard to track it, but I mean, in some ways it's hard. Some ways it's easy because they're going to provide social security numbers. They're going to provide date of birth. So anyone who wants to get a kickback to have their name or their children's name, well, they're going to be liable for perpetuating fraud. So hopefully they could get denaturalized. But there's a story about former TSA agents who at the Minneapolis airport, they witnessed Somalis leaving to Somalia with hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash. And what did the police do? They would go into their little briefing room with them. They had to sign a form, and they would walk away with the money to take back to Somalia.
Unbelievable.
Well, they were giving money to terrorist organizations. The other thing,
well, it's fungible. We don't know where it goes, but the thing is, once the cash is dispersed, it's not like it's electronic. Once it goes, they don't know where it's spent. And the thing is, the former TS agents go, hey, we could back it up because there's security footage, there's plane flights, there's people buying tickets. It's not that hard to find out who is transporting the money. But then again,
No,
it becomes a case of uh, of, of 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 will or
political
making
will.
it permissive behavior to let it happen.
And the IRS that you mentioned, instead of weaponizing it to go after people that are law-abiding taxpayers, that also requires political will. Biden said he didn't have the power to shut down the border. God damn it, Trump walks in there, shuts the border down in a nanosecond. Political will. The same thing, the IRS has the capacity to do that. They sure as hell were going after people, weren't they, after January 6th scam? Oh, Dick's Sporting Goods, Cabela's. We're going to investigate you. You could live on the other side of the country and you'd have 3 fucking black SUVs pull up to your driveway because you bought something or another. Maybe you bought a hand warmer or something from Dick's Sporting Goods, but you know that was a red flag. Or maybe you were in D.C. I went to D.C. for the Trump inauguration early this year. Uh, Again, it comes down to
Look,
that's weaponization.
the political will that Biden claimed he didn't have, okay, was the political will of his own party, right? He couldn't stop the graft. He couldn't stop, all the shit that was happening because too many of his fellow Democrats were, making a boatload of money so long as he was in power, right?
And don't forget
And
15% to the big man.
Yeah, right, but
yeah,
it's not just
exactly.
Democrats. I mean, the dirty little secret is there's rhinos who are involved with that. There's Republicans as well. They've been look at this extension of Obamacare. There's 3 or 4 rhinos that are backstabbing Trump and trying to extend Obamacare even further. You know, that's a problem. Those people need to be primaried. It's hard to do. And then there's people that are afraid, well, we'll primary this guy, then maybe we lose the general election. I don't think so. I think if you primary them with a strong conservative, depending on the district.
I think the Minnesota fraud story is going to pull a big hamper for Obamacare. All the fraud being perpetrated.
They need, but Marcus, yes, but they need to connect the dots. You earlier said, Raul, about people getting pissed off. People, and including this guy right here, are furious with Kash Patel and Pam Bondi. What the fuck are they doing? All they do is talk and talk and talk, and not a fucking person gets arrested. I don't see one.
Well, one
That's
thing about Pam Bondi, to give her credit, her DOJ did a record amount of wins with the Supreme Court. So
Yeah,
I mean, she could like diversify or not diversify, but allocate somebody more competent to handle the prosecution, where she could handle, all the litigation going against the Trump administration.
why is that Kilmar Abrego still in this country? The motherfucker was in El Salvador. Some judge. Why is Trump not ignoring those judges? What are they going to do to him? What's some pissant ectomorph judge going to do to Trump if he says "fuck you"? Why is that guy still in this country? That infuriates people. And my fear, gentlemen, is that the Republican base will get frustrated. We punish politicians that don't do their job. We're not like the Democrats, and that's our downfall. Unfortunately, it's our own worst enemy. Our integrity is our own worst enemy. That's something that concerns me.
Uh, Carlos, you mentioned like you want to go back to like some like my about like Miami relating to the fraud.
Yes,
Uh,
before we end off tonight. Yes, in Miami, and I remember I was there till just 3 years ago, and I was practicing dentistry, so I treated an enormous amount of people. And the stories I'd get. Well, my mom had a lady that was doing some maid work at the house, and she said, "Oh, I'm going to vote for Obama because this is all in Spanish. I like Obama because he gives me food stamps, he gives me a phone, and he lets me go to Cuba. So I'm going to vote for Obama." But more typically, you got the single mothers, and these were bitches having 2, 3 kids with different men shacking up. And you would ask, why are they not? They can investigate anything they want to. The Department of Health would come snooping on my ass periodically. Biomedical control would come in and check and do inspections. The fire department would come every fucking year religiously to check my exit signs, to make sure that my extinguisher was good. Why weren't they going after these people? Because there's no political will. And somebody's benefiting. All those bureaucracies are jobs programs. The Cuban population that came if in the 60s, Raul, you know what we got. It was called refugio, which means refuge.
yeah.
We got a little box, and it had some USDA. It had navy beans, it had sugar, it had flour, it had later powdered eggs. Whoa, powdered eggs. It had a cylinder of spam, okay, which we call the
Speaking of which,
meat.
yeah.
That's what
Speaking
we
of which,
got.
you know that the Cuban Refugee Assistance Program, I think, is perhaps one of the few federal assistance programs that expired and expired pretty quickly. I remember looking it up one time. I was doing some research, and it started, in the early '60s when
Yeah.
Fidel, right after Fidel took power, and waves and waves of people wanting to get out of Cuba because they didn't want to live in a communist country, my own family included. But I think if I'm not mistaken, by the late '60s, if not by the early '70s,
It
that
was gone.
program had already ended, right? There were no more people receiving benefits from the Cuban Refugee Assistance Program. In fact, they shut it down, right?
You had to,
Because everybody had found a job and was working and contributing to society, and they didn't need, government subsidized, tins of cheese and all that stuff.
well, also we had pride, we had a work ethic,
Yeah.
but today that the post-revolutionary Cubans, that's another thing. One of the excuses, it's a bullshit excuse in this country. Oh well, in Somalia, it's virtuous to steal from the government. And this country or that country, you have to do that to survive. The same can be said for Cuba: fraud,
Yeah.
lying, fleecing. But you know
No,
what? You're not
listen,
in Cuba.
listen. We see it down here, right? I mean, this generation of Cubans that have come in the past couple of decades is very, very different. Why? Because they grew up in a communist system. They grew up what you just alluded to, Carlos. There's that famous saying that the communists pretend to pay us and we pretend to work, right? Well, the people that pretend to work take it one step further and they steal from the government because that's the only way that they can make ends meet. So the Somalis, coming from that background, Somalia's, you can't even, Cuba's in bad shape, man. Somalia is like 10 times worse. You know what I'm saying? I can't imagine the mentality of, where they come from and basically ruled by warlords, right? And I'm sure when you start peeling back this onion, you're going to find that there are a couple of quasi warlords running this whole scam
Yeah.
in Milwaukee, because that's the way that they are used to being governed,
Fondling and having sex with young girls is perfectly normal in Sharia law. Their father was a pedophile
and
with
you
a
know what?
9-year-old wife. What do you expect?
And God bless the ones that have basically made it, like Ilhan Omar, that she's got an education, she's now a congresswoman, but old habits die hard, and
Yes.
apparently one of those is padding your pocketbook, right? So it takes more to be a good, honest American citizen than just looking good and speaking well and getting yourself elected into office. It takes some real backbone. It takes some honesty and hard effort, right? And so
Yeah. There's no incentive
I'm
on any
not
of
saying that doesn't exist in the Somali population, but the bad ones, in this case at least, are overshadowing whatever good actors are out there.
Yeah, they on the contrary, they have been outspoken and their disdain for this country, their willingness and their desire. And then you have the vice mayor of Minneapolis walking around salam alam alaikum or whatever the fuck that is, wearing a hijab. That's disgusting. I mean, if you really feel sympathy or you feel like you are one with them and you genuinely have simpatico, that's one thing. But that is nothing but pandering. You remember Pelosi and Schumer kneeling with these African things? They had this striped garb, and it turned out that it was of the tribe that had the most slaves in the history of the African continent. They didn't know they were putting on. It's like, well, I didn't know it was a KKK robe. I thought it was just a bathrobe.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I thought the hood was just to protect my head.
Right.
Is there anything else you want to talk about Miami?
No,
No, I
man.
think it's pretty, but again, yeah, there's a stark difference. The difference is in Miami, they were never allowed to run amok to that degree. But to the degree that they did, that they were able to run amok, was a lack of oversight and people that didn't want to go to that house and find out, are you really living there alone, Mrs. Gomez? With your 3 kids, or isn't there a guy in there whose bed you share, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
Anything else?
but listen, speaking of that, in all honesty, there's a lot of people down here in the city in Miami here that are benefiting enormously from those Obamacare subsidies. Okay, a ton of them, and that shit needs to stop, right? And But what ends up happening, as with anything else, right? I mean, there are a lot of insurance people down here that are well established and contribute to political campaigns,
Yep.
and they're putting pressure on some of our own conservative representatives in Congress, supposedly conservative representatives in Congress, to vote to extend the Obamacare subsidies because it's making them rich, right? By providing these subsidies to people that otherwise wouldn't have them. So
You notice you never hear a peep out of Representative Mario Diaz-Balart. Not a fucking peep.
right now, those guys, listen, they've gerrymandered their seats. Okay.
Yeah, Rhino. I just said he's the Rhino.
They're in there. They're all that, and they've got a core group of big pocketed donors that they listen to and that fund their campaigns, year after year. And so they don't need to be heard from because they're just postalitas. I mean, they're just figureheads, right? I mean, they have a couple of people manning their offices, here locally to do constituent services and handle complaints about somebody's Social Security deposit that didn't arrive on time or something. But other than that, they're just waiting it out and hoping to, be able to qualify for retirement benefits from Congress and continue to cash that 174,000, and trade on inside information and all the other perks that come with being a U.S. senator, including our own
consultants.
Our own Cuban representative from the great state of New Jersey. Gold Bar Menendez, right? Gold Bar Menendez.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, what did Miami? There's not Dade County. What did the city of Miami just do? They elected a Democrat mayor. Case in point.
Yeah. The jury's out. She's a liberal, but let me tell you, man. I mean, we had it coming because why? Because we've had a bunch of morons, Republican morons running the city now for way too long. And it's kind of like I liken it to the situation in Venezuela, right? Where Venezuelans elected
Chavez.
Chavez, right? But why? Because they had a whole string of corrupt, dictators, all right? And the people were finally just fed up and said, well, hell, let's give it to Hugo Chavez, this guy who's, socialist, a communist. Well, how much worse can it get?
Right.
And they found out that, it could get a lot worse, right? And now they're finding out that it's gotten even more,
even a lot worse than Batista. So, guys, as we end off here now, I'm going to do lightning round. How long does Maduro last? I'm going to say 2 months. Marcus.
2 to 3 months would be good.
I agree. Right? I agree. Those ships have been out there for a while. They can stay out there, a long time. They can be replenished at sea and all that stuff. And they're making stops in Trinidad and Tobago, and but it's they got to wrap this thing up in the next 2 or 3 months. I agree with you guys.
Yeah, because Miami is not just Cuba anymore. Miami has been for a couple decades the de facto capital of Latin America.
It has been.
It's not just us. It's Argentina, Venezuela, Nicaragua, you name it. All right, so that we're going to end off. I want to wish all of you a happy and healthy 2026, and may good things happen for this nation. You guys want to make any parting end of the year bye-byes?
No.
Marcus?
No. Bah humbug.
Happy 2026.
All right. Happy 2026.
Yeah.